Shikhan, hello everybody.
My name is Siwu.
And my name is Blake. We want to welcome you all to the second panel discussion of the North Country Art, Land and Environment Summit. The topic of this panel discussion is food sovereignty at the time of COVID-19. So, with further ado, I will pass the word to Siwu here, and they will give the land acknowledgement.
To begin, we want to acknowledge the land on which we stand currently. We're where you're all joining us from many places in this region or around the world. However, this summit was organized on Haudenosaunee Territory, specifically the land of the Mohawk people. We also want to acknowledge our roles as settlers on this land, acknowledging the role and the violence that was committed by settler populations as they moved in and conquered this territory. In the conquest of Turtle Island, the land was partitioned. This land specifically was partitioned and cut up by multiple empires. Currently, the Haudenosaunee Territory is divided between multiple settler borders, the borders of the United States and Canada. Just as the settler communities partitioned this land, imposing their grasp on this soil, also too did settler men, and I'm going to specify men, impose their vision on the way food was grown on this land. And instead of having more flowing growth of different plants collaborating and growing together in collaboration with the people that were growing them, instead there were straight lines. Everything was divided and partitioned, commodified. So in this conversation about food and food sovereignty, we also must acknowledge that the food that we consume, a lot of it is consumed with this practice which is a settler colonial practice. Thank you.
Thank you. So on behalf of the North Country Land, Art and Environment Summit, I would like to thank our collaborating partners. These are the people who have helped organizing, and of course, the land and the water who have made this summit possible. This program was funded by the Humanities New York with the support of the National Endowment of the Humanities, the St. Lawrence University Arts Collaborative Grant, and the Richard F. Brush Gallery. We would also like to thank the North Country Public Radio for being our media sponsor, and the Weave News for hosting us tonight. The specific panel is happening in tandem with the Richard F. Brush Gallery exhibition, Water and Origin, honoring the first storyteller. And finally, I want to pass the word to Claudia Ford, who is going to be our moderator tonight.
Thank you so much to Tsimu and Blake. And thank you to all of you who are with us. We are, in fact, both on Zoom and on Facebook Live. So I think some people are watching us in different channels. So it's hard to tell exactly how many people are joined us, but you are all welcome and we are glad to be here with you. This panel tonight on food sovereignty in the time of COVID-19, it's a really important topic and we have really exciting panelists here to speak to us about their personal experience of this topic. We have gardeners, we have farmers, we have educators, and across the board, we have people who have a very deep spiritual connection to the land, to food, to farming, to agriculture, and really importantly, to their communities. So I know that you will get quite a bit out of listening to our speakers this evening. What we'd like to do is ask that you please not use Q&A, but use the chat function if you have a question. And we do have someone moderating the chat. That's Derek, who's with us this evening. It will be helping me with any questions that are asked in the chat. I suggest listening to what speakers have to say. You may have questions to address to one particular speaker, or you may want to address them to the entire panel. Either of those are fine. So again, that's the chat function on Zoom and not the Q&A function. So what we will do first this evening is briefly all of us introduce ourselves, and then we'll have also a short presentation from each of our panel members. Most of our time this evening will be for your questions, for discussion, for listening to the panelists talk to each other as well. So I will start. My name is Claudia Ford. I'm an associate professor of environmental studies at SUNY Potsdam. And so I am here in Potsdam on unceded Mohawk territory. And let's see, I go by she, her pronouns. And I've been here in Potsdam for a year. Before that, I was in Rhode Island, in Providence. And before that, I was overseas. So I think I'll leave it at that for my introduction. And I will ask first, Gajit Juni, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So Sego, Gajit Juni Youngets, Waxkalewa. My name is Gajit Juni, which means she makes flowers. I am from this land, from the Kaniatarowanénhne Territories in Aguilar-Izzo, and I welcome you to our territories of our people, the Haudenosaunee.
Thank you, Gajit Juni. Carmen?
Hi, everybody. My name is Carmen. I consider myself a Black queer farmer earth worker. Right now, I'm in Athol, Massachusetts. This is Nipmuc territory and their ancestral lands. And I'm really happy to be here with all of you all and to learn so much from the beautiful panel and collection of people that are here. So very happy to be here.
Thank you, Carmen. Himani.
Hello, everybody. I am greeting you from two farms, both of which sit on the lands of the Haudenosaunee. And I am in Saratoga County. That's my present location. And my future location will be Washington County. I'm a professor at Empire State College, and I'm also a farmer and the owner of Squashville Farm with my husband. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kat? We can't, yeah, you have to unmute.
You know.
There you are.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kat Bennett, hailing from DePoyster, New York, Haudenosaunee Territory. I work two farms, Milkweed Tessitouras and River State Farm, as a regenerative agriculturalist.
Great. Well, thank you, and welcome to all the panelists. I think one of the big interests, of course, is we're in the middle of a number of pandemics. We know the immediate impact that COVID-19 had, starting in the early part of this year, January, February, and definitely in March of 2020. We have seen the impact of systemic and individual cases of racism and the way that has impacted our society. And then, of course, the way these two things come together. And there are those who are suggesting we're having a third pandemic of climate change. And I want to acknowledge my brothers and sisters and family. I have children who live on the West Coast. And I know there are people calling from Portland, Oregon. And so I really want to acknowledge what they're going through right now. And I don't know if we can rightfully call all of those things pandemics, but they certainly point to a situation that is somewhat beyond our control and is taking over in a manner that is massive all at once. Some of the things that we experienced together in March. And so I think what we're about to hear now is about how has this affected the food system? What are some of the things that we started to notice? Many of us already knew these things about our food system and about agriculture and about our relationship to land. But what are some of the things that we started to notice when COVID-19 came on the scene, that we started to notice about food, about land, about farming? And these are the things that our panelists are going to speak to us this evening. So I'd like to invite Gajit to please address us first. Thank you.
Sego. So I actually did a little PowerPoint presentation just so I could show you some visuals of things from our culture and from what we do in our family with regards to agriculture. So I am an artist in the community. I'm also a filmmaker and I'm an educator. I'm the director of the Title VI program for Native Education at Salmon River School. I'm also a cultural specialist. So I do a lot of teaching in the school and in the community. And so I'm just kind of speaking to you from personal experience and the things that I'm aware of about agriculture. And as far as COVID-19 goes, I don't know how much it affected us with regard to agriculture, because we just kept doing what we usually do, which is planting, acknowledging our seeds, carrying on with our ceremonies. I guess that was a little bit challenging, that part. When we had our ceremonies, we had to think about the safety of the people when we were doing our ceremonies, and usually there's a lot of people when we meet. So that was something that was affected. So I'm just going to go through some of these slides, and then if you have questions for me after, I'm going to share my screen. So this is a piece of artwork that's involved with the show that they're doing, and it was done by Yosta, who's Bear Clan. And it's a reflection of Sky Woman and the creation story, and Sky Woman's falling from the earth and falling to this water world where she brought with her seeds and roots and also the knowledge of the sky beings. And she spread the dirt on the turtle's back, and the turtle grew into the earth. So in our worldview, for us and our creation story, it was a woman that was here first, and it was her knowledge that was a catalyst to start the earth and start all living things. This is actually an image of an earthworks piece that I did probably 15 or 20 years ago. And when I was listening to our creation story, and they talked about Sky Woman having a daughter and her daughter dying during childbirth when she gave birth to twins. And what they said about Sky Woman's daughter is that she placed her on top of the ground and then covered her in earth. And then when she went back to the site where she had left her daughter, she noticed all of these plants growing from her daughter's body. So on the left-hand side is the shape of Sky Woman's daughter. And then on the right-hand side is the plants that would have grew out of her body. So out of her head, you see like our traditional tobacco, which is what we use for ceremony. And then from her heart, there's wild strawberries growing from there, because our heart kind of looks like those wild strawberries. And if you squeeze those strawberries, it kind of looks like the blood that our heart pumps around our body. From her breasts grew corn, because that's the main sustenance of our people, just like a mother to their baby. From her belly grew squash, and it's kind of a reflection of all of us, when we're inside of our mother's womb, we're connected to her by that umbilical cord. And if you watch the way squash grows, that's the way it grows. It has those vines that move around, and they kind of look like the umbilical cord. And from her fingers grew string beans. And if you look at your hands, they kind of look like the shape of string beans. And from her feet grew potatoes. Like when we run around in the summer and we get our feet all covered in dirt, that's how the potatoes look. So this is just an art piece I did as a reflection of that story. But as you listen to me talk, you notice already like the feminine energy in our beliefs, in our worldview, and in our culture. This one is an image on the right that's actually in the exhibit. It's called Haudenosaunee, our first home. So for every person, our first home is in the waters of our mother. And in our culture, we believe that the women are connected to the moon, and the moon controls the water. Our grandmother moon controls the water, and she controls when the babies are going to be born. And on the left-hand side is a picture of one of my latest grandsons that was born, and that's my youngest daughter. So in our culture, when a baby's born, they're greeted in our language. And I'm very fortunate that my daughter is able to speak the language, because I'm not a fluent speaker. So really proud that she can do that. So she greeted my grandson, and when they greet them, they tell the baby who their parents are, and then they introduce them to all the natural world. So they say to the baby, and they say to the earth, this is the baby. And they say to the waters, this is the baby. To the medicines, this is the baby. To the plants, this is the baby. So they're able to greet each other. So that's how we start in that way to establish that connection with everything around us. The roles of women for us, like before European contact, it was the women that were in charge of all agriculture. So it was women's responsibility to plant all of the gardens. And we worked together in our clan villages, and we would go out together, and we would plant all of, fields and fields of corn and beans and squash, and we were responsible for that. And we would get help sometimes from the older men and the children to help care for the gardens. We did a lot of Three Sisters gardens, and doing mounds and different types of agriculture. And that the role of the women really was affected a lot by colonization. When European people came over here, that was one of the things that I think personally in my research and the things that I've noticed that they really attacked our women. So they seeing the women in places of power, like controlling the agriculture is like controlling the economy. Also, our women were in charge of appointing all of the leaders, and they were also leaders themselves. So we had a role in every aspect of our being, socially, politically, economically. The women were equal with the men. So that was something that kind of got deconstructed by colonization. And as a result of things like boarding schools and government policies against, our religion and our way of life. So that really tore down a lot of the women's roles. And even like when our young people were taken away from their parents and put in these boarding schools, they taught the men how to do agriculture, and they taught the women to stay in and do housework. So that was really detrimental to the way that we did things. Now I'm getting more towards, this is just these are my own photos of my family. So that's my Lugani, my father on the left, and he plows up the fields for us. And when we do planting every spring, first in our community, we'll have a ceremony for our seeds, acknowledging the seeds and that it's time to plant. And when we plant, our whole family is out there planting, and we sing to those seeds. So we have songs that we sing to help those seeds to grow. And so we all work together to do that. And we're planting seeds that our grandmothers have passed on to us for generations and generations. We're still planting the white corn. We're still planting our beans. And so we pass down those seeds to the generations. That's my grandson in the bottom left-hand corner, just going through the cornfield. So as we're growing, we're also still working together. And on the top right is me with my granddaughter, and we're in the garden. And then these two things that are on the left, the top one is a Three Sisters garden. And this is something that I did as part of our summer culture program with the youth. We did a program with JOM and our Title VI program, and I do cultural teachings over the summer. So we planted these Three Sisters gardens. And on the bottom part, we have in our school district, we have several of these indoor gardening systems. And so even in my classroom, we're planting herbs and lettuce and different things all throughout the year. So we go in and we show the young people how to plant, and then especially the little kids get really excited to see little seedlings come up. Like they get so happy to see the little things growing. So those are some of the things we do like in the school. This is some images of harvesting. So on the top left, my grandson and his friend are out there and they're harvesting the corn. And then one of my friends is helping harvest some of our traditional tobacco. And then the other photo is of my classroom. So I teach Native studies and I also teach traditional art. So I brought in a big mound, a big pile of corn from my garden, and I taught them how to braid it because a lot of them don't have exposure to do that. So something we did together, which we won't be able to do this year because of the COVID, where like the social distancing and stuff is pretty crazy right now at school. Food is medicine. So this shows like a making of the food on the top right. Whenever we have gatherings, we use a lot of our traditional foods. And of course, for ceremonies, we're using the corn and beans and squash for the soup. And so that's incorporated into our ceremonies. That's my granddaughter on the left, and she's eating our green corn. The two in the middle are some of my students. I teach them how to make cornbread and corn mush and our traditional foods. And on the right is a tamale that I just made not too long ago. So, and then my last slide is just about surviving. So the COVID-19 is going on right now, but there's been a lot of things that have gone on for our people, and we've survived a lot. So this is just another one of those things that we'll get through, and we get through it by continuing to practice who we are, by continuing to plant the seeds, by continuing to teach these things to the younger generation, and that's how we do it. That's why we're still here. So I guess this is what I wanted to share, and I hope that it was helpful for somebody to listen a little bit about our people here. It's important to know the people that you live next to, and to understand and be aware. And there's a lot of good teachings that I think we have that could benefit not only our surrounding communities, but the whole world. So Nyawa for inviting me, and I'm glad to share a few words.
Thank you so much, Gajitjuni. And we will take questions at the end for everyone, because I know that some questions may be for one person or for multiple. So go ahead and write your questions down so you remember them. But thank you for those beautiful photographs, and for sharing your artwork with us. May I please call on Carmen?
All right. Thank you all. So beautiful to hear that story and the deep connection. I think for me, similarly, what's coming up for me during this time is kind of what brought me into the work with the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. And what drew me to that was this kind of understanding that's been, I guess, within me about the deep importance of land and the deep importance of being able to connect to land, to have place, to have space. And in a lot of ways, I guess, really being able to look at food and what's kind of going on right now with COVID-19 in a way where there is not this extractive concept of food and food sovereignty as if it's something that can sustain us alone, but to really look into the connectivity of the whole ecological system, and our ability to be with the land and to be in relationship is very important. And so I think in a lot of ways, how our food system has reared itself to be in the model of extraction, capital, wealth, being the primary driving force to our current models for food that a broad majority of people are interacting with. I think this model really is what has brought a lot of suffering to people, especially Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. And so for me, I'm really interested in providing avenues of access to land as a source of liberation, as a source of empowerment, to be able to have more understanding and connection to the whole process of what we eat and how we are with the land. Also, I think with that too is just like basic needs, right? With land comes a place where there's housing, and so just kind of looking at that as the foundation. And then I think what came up for me during this time is I'm in a place where I'm in a rural setting. I'm able to be with the land, and I have space. While COVID was going on, I was able to go outside almost every day because, you know, social distancing was possible for me. I was able to touch the earth. I was able to feel the fresh air, to have water hit my face. All of these things. Meanwhile, you know, many people in my community, my family, were in, you know, 600 square foot apartments on third floors, and having to really face the harshest realities of the food system, of being pushed and driven into cities. And so at this moment, a lot of the work that I'm doing is trying to create community-based networks, bridges between rural landscapes and urban landscapes, to work in partnership. A lot of the things that we can offer in rural space as it related to the pandemic specifically was a place for people to breathe, to touch the earth, to be in open space, to even go outside. And what the urban environment often at this point offers Black, Brown, and Indigenous people in rural spaces is a place to go back to be able to be in space where you're around people who are reflections of you, who are able to understand both your spoken and unspoken languages, and to have that connectivity on a face-to-face level, which right now, because of how land is the distribution of land is not possible for many people of color and Indigenous populations in rural spaces. And so this network, a community-based network and system of connection is really, really fundamental to us being able to address these type of crises that have come up, and also for the long-term well-being of our peoples as a collective. And then I think partnerships, as we saw with like the mutual aid that came up, establishing these partnerships on land where we have systems that we can develop our own childcare systems, our own health systems, our own ways of being with the land that uplift how we practice. We saw how with animal meat production, just the massive slaughtering of so many animals in ways that really don't connect to our humanity. Being on the farm, we were able to have a slaughter, goat slaughter, that was very, very much ceremony based. It was very much process, connected, community based, intimate. And this type of ability to be able to enact your cultural ways of being with animals, land, and food are very much needed. And in order to do so, we have to have space and ability. People who are in urban environments and in cities, they don't really have a choice to have an experience like that and how to do an animal slaughter if they should eat meat in a way that's whole to who they are as people. And so being able to have that space and invite people out to be a part of that process, while on the other end of it, we're seeing just this massive production focused reality play out. It really opened up for me the need to really push for access to land and more control as a community in how our food systems play out in ways that resonate with our values and traditions and our practices. And I think lastly with that is just is a call for us to establish a new way of looking at our economies and how we interact with food, not in a way of a commodity, not as the land as a way of a commodity, but really changing these systems that have perpetuated us kind of being marginalized and trapped into this production cycle. And so through the Black Farmer Fund, through other projects where we can go with traditions like the African Susu, where we as a collective shape how we engage economically and how we take care of one another. So this is kind of what we're hoping to do with the land trust, knowing that land itself cannot be something that is really commodified or ever owned. And also knowing that there's an immediate need for our people to have space. And what can we do in this time to allow and alleviate for the survival of our people and for the thriving of our people, pathways for them to have these experiences, to be able to share and uplift one another through our skills and knowledge transfer, to uplift our cultural traditions, to really bring forward the teachings that we have about the land, about how to grow food, how to be in relationship to the plant and to the whole ecological systems that bring us together. And so through the land trust, that is the goal. And I'm really inspired by what I've seen so far in the presentation and really looking forward to learning more. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Carmen, who's someone that I work closely with on the Land Trust and the Black Farmer Fund. So I am always so happy to hear what you have to say. Thank you. May I call on Himani?
Hello, everyone. Once again, I just want to state my acknowledgement. I greet you from 2 farms, both of which sit on the lands of the Haudenosaunee. And I greet you tonight as a writer, a professor, a farmer, the daughter of immigrants from India, and a self-acknowledged settler. And so the events in America's colonialist history placed my present farm in Saratoga County. and racialized protests against our regenerative farming practices have prompted my husband and I to move our farm to land in Washington County. As a settler, I wish to honor the original caretakers of both of these lands and offer the respect to the Haudenosaunee who are here in body as well as in spirit. So Claudia asked us to speak to the title of this panel, Food Sovereignty in the Time of COVID. And because I am a professor in part, I am going to pull out my academic hat in a few minutes and parse out some terms, farmer, food security, and food sovereignty. But first, I'd like to actually say a little more about my farm and the communities we serve. So our farm is Squashville Farm. It's named after the road on which my husband and I currently live. We moved to New York from Seattle, Duwamish lands, in 2010 and started the farm as a backyard garden shortly after purchasing our home in 2011. How the garden became a farm has a lot to do with the soil we discovered in the backyard when the snow melted. It was literally dead. The land had been hunting and fishing grounds for the Haudenosaunee, and European settlements shifted the use to dairy production until about the mid-1950s, when red and white pine cultivation took over to create lumber and paper. Around the 1970s, these industries died out and the land started to become more residential. The wooded areas became full of invasive pines and other invasive brush. The previous owner of our house was a single mother with 2 boys, and one of them rented or borrowed a Kubota tractor and dug out most of the yard to create a racetrack for dirt bikes. And repeated runs over the track's bumps, hills, and ditches introduced toxic fumes that had the effect of killing even weeds. So the land was literally dead when we found it after the snow had melted. So I suggested to my husband that we turn the track into a series of winding raised beds. And that's essentially what we did, with goat and sheep manure, green manure from an overabundance of zucchini that we planted, and hundreds of dollars of bags of topsoil that we poured into the land in that first year. And by the end of 2011, we had renamed the racetrack the Garden Circle. And over the years that followed, we began learning that we could rebuild the soil further if we rotated crops and introduced animals. We got chickens, then goats, and later ducks, and then geese. And we began learning that the soil would actually heal on its own if we just didn't engage in such kind of killing practices as mowing and tilling. So today our backyard is a hot mess of flowering weeds and wild berries that attract bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, and other pollinators. Our gardens produce at least 20 times the amount of food that we ourselves can eat. And our animals provide us not only with eggs and meat, but also with manure that feeds the soil and reduces our reliance on organic fertilizers. From our animals and from the land, we get good health, we get vigor, and we get a lot of joy. We donate vegetables and eggs in peak seasons to a local food pantry, a grassroots Black Lives Matter movement, and an assisted living center on our block. We have a small CSA for eggs, and we sell our products at farmers markets in Saratoga and Schenectady. I coordinate a garden at the local food pantry and facilitate a partnership between the pantry and one of our farmers markets, through which products from the market's vendors are brought to the pantry for distribution to elderly and lower income consumers. And so as we grow our farm, with our move from 3 acres to 48 acres, we're really looking forward to doing more. So now the academic part, the parsing of terms. Farm. From about 2013 to 2015, I struggled to define ourselves and our land. Was it a garden? Was it a homestead? A farm? I looked up the terms and discovered that the USDA defines a farm in capitalistic monetary terms. A farm is a space where products such as foods are created for the purpose of selling. A farm, in essence, is a business that seeks profit, according to the United States Department of Agriculture. Food security. So when I went up for tenure in 2016, I included a narrative about our farm and the work I was doing with the food pantry and farmers markets. My peer reviewers very nicely commended me for making significant contributions to the food security of Saratoga. So for years thereafter, I used food security to define one of the missions of our farm. About a year ago, I encountered the term food sovereignty. And initially, I thought of it as synonymous with food security. Over the past couple of months, I've come to realize that the terms are actually quite distinct, and in some ways, they're at odds with each other. The United Nations defines food security as the condition of having physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. The term has been deemed inadequate because it does not stipulate who produces that food and whether the food is provided in a manner that really meets a people's needs. So in a sense, food security is like the notion of tolerance. It's a perpetuation of systemic oppression with a more benign face. Food sovereignty is much more than having a sense of security within a racist and colonialist framework. It's a movement that seeks to actually break that framework. And food is central to that movement because food is much more than something that we eat. It's one's identity, it's one's social relationships, it's one's culture, it's one's health. So where I stand in relationship to these three terms is a little bit complex. I am a farmer, and as such, I am engaged in the trading of foods for money. I might not be in it for profit, but I do recognize that there is a monetary process involved that involves at least covering our costs. And despite the clear inadequacies in the concept of food security, I do want to help ensure that all the people around me have access to healthy, nutritious food. And I believe in food sovereignty. I see it as a space for learning, alliance building, and growth. Food sovereignty in the time of COVID-19. As the two previous speakers have noted, the pandemic has uncovered many realities. One of them is that the corporate food supply chain is weaker than the small farms, the community gardens, and the not-for-profit agricultural entities that it has sought to oppress. When the pandemic hit, groceries didn't have enough food because the transport networks that linked corporate foods to corporate stores shut down. The corporate farms had too much food, and much of it was dumped. And in the meantime, small farms like ours did pretty well. Not only did we have food, but we had food that people could trust. Only one set of hands is on most of our produce from the time of harvest to the point of purchase, and those hands are mine. So knowledge of how coronavirus spreads via personal contact and touch actually motivated more people to visit farmers markets for their weekly goods. And in a sense, I actually want to suggest that this is food sovereignty at level one, a very, very basic low level. Some control over the food one eats through being a farmer, and some control over the food one eats through knowing the farmer from where the food comes. And that relationship has always existed. During the pandemic, it became more apparent. Yet with the pandemic, there's also been two more somewhat grim effects. As the more affluent consumers grab local foods, there's a risk of less being available to those who need it. And there's also the backlash to success. As Black, Indigenous, people of color farmers and other producers create structures of resilience, such as gardens that become entrepreneurial farms, the white majority feels a threat and they lash out. And in a sense, that is actually why we're moving Squashville Farm from one place to another. Last Sunday, my husband and I went to our new land to bless it. In the house, which sits literally on the Hudson River, as is evidenced in its very wet basement, we offered halwa, a sweet dish used in Hindu rituals, and water from our current well. Outside in the fields, we offered crops from our current land that evoke both lands past and nourish its future, corn, squash, and beans. And we look forward to working the land, and we look forward to allowing the land to work on us. So thank you all so very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Jiminy, for that. Wow. I'm going to ask Kat if you would be our final presentation for the panel. Kat?
So I'll start with a small explanation of myself and the land that I work with, and then I'll try to be brief but move into how COVID has affected us and what changes we've seen. So 20 years ago, my family and I had to move from the mountains of Maine, where my mother's family had been located for over 500 years, to northern New York. We were running from industrialism. A television tower was being built behind our house, and there was really no way out, and land prices were too high. So that's why we came here. We got here, and the land, like has been mentioned by other presenters, was just barren, really destroyed by dairy that had started out small and gotten bigger. And so I've been incredibly blessed to watch my parents over the past 20 years learn how to help the ecosystems rejuvenate. We now have dozens of threatened species that we both cultivate and simply provide sanctuary for. And in providing sanctuary for those threatened species, we've also incorporated human sanctuary into our farms. So we have a community-supported agriculture system that nobody else in our area is doing. It's entirely labor-based. It's not monetary-based at all. It's the first in our area to do that. And we have taught thousands of students, thousands of people of all different ages, people from youth program centers. We welcome new employees on a regular basis. We try as hard as we can to create our farm as not just a community center, but a holistic ecological community center. So then when I graduated from St. Lawrence University in 2016, through some interesting routes, I began my own small potato farm, milkweed tussock tubers, utilizing my parents' land, or the land where my parents live, and living right nearby. And it's been amazing to me how much I've managed to learn in just the 4 short years that I've been growing potatoes, as compared to all the many years I spent watching my parents. I work specifically with varieties that were developed on my road 75 years ago, but I'm one of the last people growing them. And I'm working to help restore those varieties, as well as other potato varieties that are incredibly threatened by climate change right now, that on the West Coast have been frozen out and they're almost disappearing. For me, that's been so very, very exciting. And I'm also trying to move into more native root crops so that I can learn about how to incorporate my agricultural practices into the ecosystem in a way that is more recognized by the greater society. Right now, everyone knows potatoes, but very few people around here know blue potatoes, and very few people around here know ground nuts or Jerusalem artichokes, or any of the other foods that could be so abundant here. And so I really feel that my job at this point, working with my parents and working with community members, is actually working for the land. I was thinking about this so much last night, trying to prepare for the panel, and I realized that the land is really my boss, which is something I'd never put words to, but I was able to articulate more. I walk out and I try as hard as I can to really listen to what's going on. Where do the trees need to be planted? What's going on with the insects? How many hummingbirds were born this year? because I feel that right now, as a young person, as a young woman, regenerative agriculture is what I should be doing. It's the most effective means to holistically restore ecosystems while providing food for a multitude of species, including humans. And so looking at that in light of COVID, in many ways has been incredibly terrifying. As a small farmer, I'm well aware of the horrendous setup of our industrial food train. But it's been so interesting seeing the rest of my community wake up and see that too. We are getting calls on a very regular basis, people asking if we have meat for sale, people asking if we have piglets for sale. The number of people on my road who have suddenly decided they're going to become pig farmers is enormous and mildly humorous, because most of them don't actually know what pigs look like. But it's really, really interesting, and in many ways, and heartwarming to see how many people, whether they quite know what they're doing or not, are really trying to get back to the soil. Our CSA membership skyrocketed this year, and even now in October, we're still getting requests as it comes to a close. And I find that, like I said, I find that heartwarming. But at the same time, I actually have found COVID to not be nearly as much of a threat to myself, to the community, or to my work as climate change. So we're talking about one pandemic, and for me, my low-level anxiety comes entirely from another sort of pandemic, as you mentioned, Claudia. I wake up terrified of frost early in the season and the enormous drought we had. And so for us at Bittersweet and Milkweed Tussock Tubers, we are just striving to learn what traditional or older practices or new practices are out there that we can incorporate that will help us maintain our resiliency against climate change. And that's where the listening of it to the land comes in. I've learned so much about water retention this year because we had such a big drought that if I hadn't been farming in a regenerative fashion, all of my crops would have just collapsed. It would have been next to impossible to do any sort of food production. And that's what I'm hearing from other farmers who work in different fashions, that they just are not able to produce the way that they were. And so for us, we're trying to teach that too. Getting as many people on the farm learning about what needs to be done and how it needs to be done in order for us to maintain any semblance of healthy human existence, and not just maintain a semblance, but really build a new world. And that's where I've gotten to at this point is the fear is gone, and now it's just time to keep moving.
Thank you, Kat. Beautiful words for us to end on. So I think everyone who's listening can agree that this is a panel of experienced and wise and learned people who, when they're talking about food security and food sovereignty and the land and farming, know exactly what they're saying based on the experience of getting their hands in the dirt. And so I would invite our audience to come up with some questions about the subject, about what is food sovereignty in the time of COVID-19. We heard some beautiful things from both Himani and Kat about rejuvenation. I think that's a topic, land rejuvenation, a certain type of farming. And that's certainly a subject that we could get into some more. And then we heard both from Dajuni and Carmen, we heard about ceremony, different ways of talking about the importance of ceremony and land, and that really important word, Carmen, connectivity. So I encourage any questions Derek, I'm going to ask you to unmute if you have questions that you've gotten or have some to offer.
Yeah, so we haven't got any questions in the chat yet, but I have a question for Carmen. I was wondering if you could just expand a bit upon like the mission of the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust.
Yeah, so that's a big one. I think it's probably about as diversified as the people who make it up, right? Because that's pretty much what its fundamental purpose is to create a space where what you bring can be enacted upon. So it's about what is the necessity of the people. I think overall we have like these concrete goals of like 20,000 acres and like wanting to be able to create leases for like maybe 50 farmers within the first couple of years. We have these like landmark goals, but I think as far as the purpose itself for it is to work in some ways in tandem with a system we know is not meant for us. And while acknowledging that, knowing that we have people who are in a place of needing space to create that opening for us to establish something new, to establish something counter to what we know has not and will not work for us. So in many ways, it is almost a bridge to create that. And that's going to show up for some folks in the need of rest. When I look at my ancestors who who farmed, some who were brought here against their will, enslaved in South Carolina, and I think about all these years of just back-breaking work and labor, that my people have not known what it is to rest. They haven't known what it is to maximize their creativity, to what can come to be if you are allowed space to allow your mind to take you the places you want to go. I think for a lot of times we've been trapped in this mode of survival, that the space just to create and dream has eluded us. So that's one aspect. The other is a space to be able to share our deep knowledge that we've carried through our ancestors and that we have carried in our abilities to survive. That's deep wisdom. And so how do we begin to create space where we can see and bring people together on land that is held and protected to allow that type of sharing to go on, so that skill share opportunity, that knowledge transfer. And then to look at how we care for the land, how we connect to it, the practices that we interact with the land, the connection we see ourselves in it, and the ability to break away from what we have been taught as agriculture and into a more ecological understanding of it, and to care for it in these ways that are more true to our traditions. And I guess the other piece is to keep in mind where we are and the lands that when we think about where we are, we cannot deny that the indigenous peoples cared and cultivated for this space. So that is the foundation of all interaction, is that conversation, centering that knowledge, centering that understanding, and figuring out in a collaborative process, how do we overcome all of our oppressions and enter into our collective liberation. So that's what it is for me.
Thank you for that, Carmen, for that answer and that question, Derek. I see in the chat there's a question that really speaks to something that you just said, Carmen, and that I know Gajuni said very clearly from River. I would be interested to hear the panelists discuss the role of intergenerational knowledge transfer in building agricultural resilience. So I'd like to open that to any of the panelists who'd like to speak about that. I know Gajuni, you've begun to talk a little about that, and of course shared your beautiful photographs of your multi-generational family. Perhaps you can start us off.
Sure. I think it's really important that we're passing down this knowledge to the next generations, and we do it in our family with our gardening practices and the knowledge of our ceremonies, and in those ways we do that. But also as an educator in school, it's something that I try to incorporate into the classrooms. Just even thinking about where food comes from. You know, when I'm teaching, like when I do the indoor gardens with the little kids, and I'm talking about food, I bring in different items for them to look at and think about where do those seeds come from. And then I talk about organic food versus, you know, food you get in the grocery store. And I think a lot of them don't even think about those things. I think a lot of people in general don't think about that, like a lot of the stuff that's on their foods that they consume. So in this small setting, when we're planning any of those indoor gardens, at least, we're using organic soil, we're using organic seeds. And so I tell them, when you eat this food, when it's done, you know that there's no chemicals on it and it's all good, everything that you're putting in your body. So it is important to do that. And the kids get so excited by that. I mean, I just love going in there and seeing them just smiling, watching those little plants come up, and they're like, Miss Fox, my plant came up, and they're all excited. And then the same for the family. I mean, it's a way of building family connections. It's a way of building community connections when you're working side by side with your family, and you're picking beans and you're talking, and they're learning how to sort the beans out and how to dry them, and you know, it seems like it's work, you know, looking at it from the outside, but really it's a way of building relations and building family and building connections to that food. So those are just, I guess, what I have to offer in my own experience here. And I have to say, I really enjoyed listening to everybody talking. It's real encouraging, all the people that are out there planting. And that's one thing I forgot to mention when I was presenting earlier, is that's one thing I noticed in our community, is that more people started to plant as a result of what was going on with COVID. And not just because they were worried about where to get their food, but because they were able to slow down and have the time to do it. Because everybody is so like in this fast-paced kind of rat race, and not taking the time to do, you know, to connect in those ways, because we're so busy working and doing other things. So that was something that I thought was a really positive outcome from the whole COVID thing, was that people slowed down and reconnected and planted more gardens, which was very cool.
Yeah, I agree there, Junie. And that kind of goes into another, we're starting to get some questions. This is an interesting question that kind of follows from what you said from Lily. It seems every week there's a new recall of fresh vegetables due to bacterial contamination. What do you ascribe to the weak U.S. food supply chain? Has the U.S. government reduced inspection of food? How can I feel comfortable eating salad again? And I think we did start to talk about that part of the weakness in our food system. Himani, perhaps you had begun to talk about that when you talked about how your CSA members appreciated all of a sudden that it was your hands that was touching this food. Can you address that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that COVID really sort of woke us up to was the idea. I mean, we have these statements, you know, that food travels an average of 1,500 miles to get from the farm to the grocery store, whereas the food that comes to you directly from a farm via farmer's market or a CSA, maybe travels 20 miles or less. And one of the things that COVID helped us see was that many, many hands touch that produce as it's going from the farm to the processing center, to the distribution center, to the warehouse, to the shipping facility, loading onto the truck, transported across, maybe transferred again, unloaded, moved into the warehouse for the grocery store, and then brought out. And as you think about the number of hands that land on the food and the packaging and the aging that the food itself undergoes through that process, it's not a surprise that there would be contamination of some sort. And I do think that that is kind of the weakness in the food supply chain. I don't know whether inspections have been reduced. I can't really speak to that. But, to be comfortable eating salad again, visit your farmer's market or visit your farm stand, or salad, lettuce is not that hard to grow, and, give it a try. Failure is one of the best teachers. And I can say as in 10 years of farming, I've had lots of lessons from failing.
Yeah, and I can say this year, I don't have a garden space, so I did my first container garden, and I got food out of my little cardboard boxes. I found some non-toxic cardboard boxes, and I grew food that way up on my porch, and yeah, it was great. And when there were some recalls of onions, and I think we've struggled the whole season with that, I made sure I was getting onions from the CSA, again, because of knowing whose hands that touched that food and being really clear what the food supply chain was. So thank you for answering that question. I see we do have in the Q&A a question for Kat. Can you tell us a little about conserving the diversity of potatoes you are growing? Do you feel that there is enough local adaptation and resilience to ensure potato security in the North Country?
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
No, that's a good question. That's something I think about a lot. I feel as though I've actually been a little disheartened growing so many varieties of potatoes in the North Country, because most people are so familiar with just your white, maybe your red from the grocery store. So I'm striving to grow all of these oddball varieties, some of which made it directly from South America up to North America without even moving to Europe. And people are very, very excited, but nobody quite understands why it's important to be rescuing potatoes. They're potatoes, they're everyday, they're common. They don't understand that if you go down to the Andes, to Chile and Peru, where people are really growing their potatoes the same way that they've been doing it for thousands of years, there's almost 6,000 varieties down there, and not a single one of them is genetically modified. It's all through just traditional seed saving practices. Specifically in the North Country, I'm finding that those Andean varieties are way more resilient towards our droughts and our floods. There are certain European varieties that are more resilient to our cold springs. It's really a matter of choosing which varieties are going to adapt well. There's a lot of varieties that are considered really, really common, like russets, that I have absolutely no luck with. I can't grow a russet to save my life, but I can grow maca ozette really, really well, which are from Washington State and traditionally grown by the Maca people. And they do fantastic for me. Or the garnet chili, which was actually developed down in Rochester, so not that far from here. I think when you're choosing a food source that is not originally from your landscape, You really have to get to know that food source. Ecologically, it would probably be easier to grow Jerusalem artichokes because they're from this area. And I like Jerusalem artichokes, and I'm working on reviving some of the rare varieties, but they don't sell as well. So that's where the commodification of food comes in. So if you're going to pick something that's different, yeah, you just get to know that plant, whether it's potatoes or tomatoes or onions. There's an amazingly fast change that a plant can undergo to become regionally adapted. It does not take very many years. They found certain potato varieties, after under 2 decades, they can find that they're genetically different from the original strain that those seeds came from. Yeah, specifically with potatoes. And if I may quickly jump back to the next question, I hope I answered the potato question thoroughly. Inspections by the USDA have not halted, but it should be noted that food inspectors are few and far between. There's nobody who wants to do it. It's not exactly a job anybody enjoys. My potato inspector is responsible for 3 counties. And as you guys are aware, our counties are enormous. So that's one man covering thousands and thousands of miles. And in terms of salads, yeah, go to your local farmer because you know exactly what they're doing. But I would say take it a step further. Don't just go to the farmer's market. Go to the farm, ask the farmer what they're doing, learn from them. Because at this point in time, the practices being used on industrial farms, they're just getting more and more desperate as climate change gets worse and worse. And that's one reason we're seeing more and more contamination. The manure that's being used as fertilizer is not sterile. It's coming from unhealthy cows, things like that. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Kat. I see 2 questions I'd like to take. One very briefly, and then the last one I'd like all the panelists to answer. So I'm thinking maybe Himani, there's this question about choosing seeds, securing seeds from your own plants or from seed distributors, and what methods work best for you in going from season to season in terms of your seeds. Would you like to answer that?
I'll start, but I'd really like to toss the ball to Kachakoni. I think she would have some more knowledge of it. I'm hoping that with our move to a larger farm, I'll be able to do more seed saving. Right now, the primary seed that I save is for a plant it's a squash that's called bitter melon or Karela, and it's something that is used quite a bit in Indian cuisine, and the seeds are not readily available. And I have found actually that the few times that I have ordered seeds, they haven't germinated well. So it's really much better to save my own seeds in that case. And that's kind of the main one I've tried so far. I use 3 primary sources for my other seeds. One is the Hudson Valley Seed Company. They're a local seed company just about 3 hours, or not even 3 hours, about 2 hours south of me, and certified organic. I also use Johnny Seeds, which is, it's a worker-owned cooperative, a fairly big seed distributor out of Maine. And I use High Mowing as well. They are a organic seed company out of either Maine or Vermont. Most of the seed companies that I use have taken the non-GMO pledge, so I know that the seeds are non-GMO. Most of them are organic certified. So those are my primary sources. I also do actually work with like a local gardening store and choose from some of the local seed companies that they provide in their stores. So that's sort of my answer. But I love to hear what others have to say, because this is something I want to learn more about.
Great, thank you for that. And there are some national seed distributors. I know I do some work for one that helps me get seeds up here to the North Country. So definitely feel free to get in touch with me if you want to hear more about that. I'm looking at time, and I think I would actually like to go to a question that everybody can address in turn. And so if we do have time, we'll come back to seeds, but I think that River has asked a really interesting question, or a series of questions. I'm interested to hear how you all think these ideas of food sovereignty and agricultural resilience can be made accessible to all people. And then the follow-up question was, could the panelists speak to how their gender identity has influenced them in agriculture? So those are two interesting questions. I'm going to put them both kind of on the table and ask any of you to speak. Who would like to start?
I'll jump in on the food sovereignty.
Great.
I think that as individuals, anybody can do like what you did and do container gardens and start food sovereignty right there in your own house. You know, even if you're living in a city, you can do that. So those are acts of food sovereignty. And myself, I really get a thrill when I'm eating a dinner that had nowhere to do with a grocery store. So I'm eating and it's just corn and potatoes from my garden. And our farmer's market had some of those purple potatoes that she was talking about, and they were really good. So for me, it's about nutrition. It's about, and shopping locally is important. I think that's, that contributes to food sovereignty when you're shopping from your own community and you're empowering the people that are planting those foods. And that it's more nutritious because it hasn't traveled very far and it's come from the earth right here. You know what's been put on it. So all of those small things add up. And even like if all of us just plant a little bit or do a little indoor gardening, every little bit helps, and that we acknowledge and know where our food comes from. So those are acts of food sovereignty.
Thank you, Junie. And yeah, I was very careful. I sprayed mine with biodynamic preparation, my little container garden. I prayed over the seeds. I mean, literally they were cardboard boxes, but they made beautiful veggies. And I had that same experience when I made a meal that I had grown myself. That was definitely food sovereignty. Carmen, did you want to speak to this idea of accessibility to all people, or the other question about gender identity?
I'll do my best to do both. I don't know if I'm on the right view or not. But, let's see. I hope y'all can see me. Okay, so yeah, I'll do my best to answer both. I think for me, most immediate, it's connected to dignity. And so I think, food sovereignty is always the ability to be able to grow something for yourself, for your community, to be with that plant and to see it. And to have that gratification of it being on your plate and feeding those that you love and you care for, and the heart that's in it. I think on a community base, ultimately food sovereignty is for a community to be able to have a say in how food comes about through that community, who's allowed to come in, who's allowed to shape it. We have to, for me, many people in the community where I grew up face even if they make it to the grocery store, they're not treated with dignity. You're asked to put your bag up. You're not treated in full personhood. So for me, those things are tied: a community shift and the ability to do what you can in your own space to bring something to your plate to nourish your family and yourself. And for me, how does my gender identity show up? That's big as a Black queer person. it became really important for me to look for a space where I could allow my identities to fully show up. And so having access to land, having access to space to allow the traditions of my great grandmother who worked with land to relive itself in me as a queer person on the land, and to be able to create that space for folks who identify similarly to have space and community and in the food system was that's something that's really important to me. So that's how it shows up.
Thank you, Carmen. Kat or Himani?
Sure. Okay. Let me gather my thoughts for a minute. I guess when I think about food sovereignty being accessible to all people in my area, it feels incredibly daunting, which I'm sure it does to everybody. But I do live in a very conservative area, so even more so than I think other people have access to more diverse regions. But I'm looking at the Declaration of Nailini's definition of food sovereignty, and it talks about people's right to define their own food and ag systems, putting their aspirations first. So food sovereignty in and of itself, of course, is meant to be accessible to all people because it means food is accessible to all people. On a small and personal scale, I see that as the CSAs, but the non-monetary CSAs, as getting the people onto the farm, the education. Education is huge. Not just educating people about how to do something, but why to do something. Why do we need to reconnect with the soil? Why do we need to respect the waterways? And I would love to be able to do all of that in a world that we create that does not have the interference of laws and government that are deliberately working against us. But we don't have a lot of time. So one thing I look towards, personally, I would love to just abolish all the horrible laws in the industrial food chain tomorrow. Just snap my fingers and it's gone. And then it's accessible for everyone, no problem. But like I said, we're running out of time. So I look at other countries' examples of bringing small food into their people. I look at villages and towns that have created their own laws. Maine created a Food Sovereignty Act, which means you can now sell food from your home, which, believe it or not, was illegal for a very long time. Even my seeds for potatoes, I'm not allowed to sell some of them as seeds right now, because I don't have any sort of paperwork backing where they came from, because they were never given to a university or anybody with government backing. They were just developed on my land. So looking at places like Austria, where instead of giving stimulus packages to industrial farmers, they give them to the 86-year-old who has 2 cows, but she knows how to make cheese. And so they help keep her at a living wage so that she can teach others to do what she's doing. Things like that. In terms of gender, I'm able to laugh at this point because the ETC group does a yearly review called Who Will Feed Us? And what they found is that 70% of the world's food is produced by 70% of the world's farmers. And the majority of those people are women living in poverty on 3 hectares or less. And they don't have land in their name. And most of what they produce is either sold at small markets or it's simply fed to themselves and their neighbors. But so the reality is that for me, my gender is a point of strength. It's also a point of contention because on my road, which is primarily Amish and highly patriarchal, even more so than this country we live in, people question that I even own my own house. I had to change my name on my mailbox so that it actually had my full name spelled out because people thought C. Bennett meant my brother had purchased the house. I had to put Cat Bennett. But at this point in time, I'm using my gender as a tool. It's allowing me to walk into a lot of doors that 10 years ago weren't open, because there are more people now who want young women who are farming or want young women to speak up. The movements we've seen in society, the Me Too movement, has helped push anybody who doesn't identify as male more into the forefront. And I'd like to hope that we're gaining power. So I think my gender is an asset. Unfortunately, for most people in my position, it really is not. The number of farms actually owned by women is very, very small, so they don't get the recognition, despite the fact that if you walk through a farmer's market, the number of stands run by women is enormous. You're not hearing a lot of voices from outside the white male culture. You look at a panel 5 years ago on food sovereignty like this one would not have been made up of who it's made up of today. Even NOFA New York, the Organic Farming Association of New York, I'm often disappointed by the number of men who are in charge of the speeches and the workshops, because I feel like they could do a little bit more. And I guess just to tie it together, I think about specifically, I'm a big fan of Rowan White's work, and and I love the term rematriation. And for me, being able to hear somebody talk about bringing seeds back to the women in a culture has been very powerful. So I think that having more women involved in food is exactly where we need to go to make food accessible to everybody. It's really the only way. We're already doing all the work. We just need the recognition and somebody to get out of the way so that we can keep doing our jobs. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kat, and thank you for bringing Rowan into the space and the incredible work that Rowan White does. If you don't know, please, if you Google Rowan White, her work in community, her seed saving, all of that will come up. I'm looking at time, and I really do want us to respect everyone's time. I could keep going for hours, I know, and we've literally got minutes left. So I'm sure many of you are thinking that you'd like to speak to some of the people here, but I don't want to offer that. I'm going to ask each of you in turn, if it's okay with people, get in touch with you, and if so, how they do that. So Carmen, are you easily accessible, or social media, or how do we get in touch with you?
Okay, I'm not social media,
Okay.
but I guess, yeah, through email. Also, if you can, the Northeast Farmers of Color Network, if you can go to Northeast Farmers of Color Landtrust.org or NEFOC, NEFOC, landtrust.org, you can get on that listserv. It's really a dynamic listserv. And then, yeah, you can also email me at carmengroves@gmail.com.
Maybe you can type that in the chat for us. Great. And I see Himani is, oh, great, excellent. Himani has already done that. And I assume, Himani, that's how people can get in touch with you.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm also on Facebook. I'm working on getting on Twitter and Instagram, but the main social media space that I play around in is Facebook, and you can always find me there.
Excellent. I see Gajit Juni, you've put your email there. It's okay for people. And Kat, are you also in there? If you want to type in the chat.
I'm sorry, computers are not my strong point.
Oh, can somebody type this in for Kat, please?
I got it.
Oh, you got it. Okay.
It's coming.
And I will put mine in there. As we end today, I would like to just offer such a deep thanks to our panelists, to Gajuni, to Carmen, to Himani, to Kat, your generosity and your graciousness with which you have shared your wisdom. Your words have been so thoughtful. I can really say of the many panels that I have been on, this one has been the most thoughtful. And your wisdom obviously comes from your hands and from your hearts. And that's really what I have seen this evening and heard in your words. So I am so deeply grateful. And I know that the people listening are also grateful for what you have offered us. We're in a time where COVID-19 and racial oppression and climate change, what we need is revolutionaries. And what we have tonight, as we're looking at all of you, you are revolutionaries, and you are building this revolution right from where it should be built, which is from Mother Earth, from the land itself. So a deep thanks, deep gratitude to all of you for what you have offered us this evening. And I think I see Tsimu and blank, which means that our time must be up. Yes?
Well, first of all, Nyawa, thank you so much to everyone. I don't want to reiterate too much everything that Claudia said, because Claudia's thank you was everything that we could have said and more. However, I also want to thank you, Claudia. Thank you for your moderation, for your wisdom, for bringing all of us together in such a beautiful and powerful way. And I also want to thank Derek, who is not visible at the moment, but was behind the scenes, helping copy all of your questions and bring them all together into one place. Thank you so much, Derek.
Thank you, Derek.
And
All right.
Last but not least, just to point you to the future. Next week, we'll be having the Environmental Justice in the North Country event. It's happening on the 23rd at 6:30 p.m. So feel free to sign up. You can sign up on the website, nocoenvironment.org, or you can always attend the YouTube stream. So without further ado.
Yes. So thank you so much, everybody, for being with us tonight, for all your questions and comments. And I guess we'll see you next week for another episode of this summit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night. Be safe. Lots of love to everyone.